I'm sitting on this rock out in my woods because 3 years ago I dragged home the rusted-out remains of a 1956 Jeep CJ5 and started the process of rebuilding it and doing a full EV conversion on it. It's by far the most ambitious project I've ever attempted. I did get it moving last year with a low-power temporary battery pack, but it's been stuck in the shop since then while I work on building out the permanent pack, and in that time I've been kind of dreaming about driving it up and parking it on this rock. So today we're going to make that happen. And by today, naturally, I mean over the course of the past 3 months. Because if you're like me, and I hate to say it, but if you follow this channel, you unfortunately probably are, the projects you work on don't always cooperate, and the honey-do list sometimes gets in the way. So I thought this video would be a short 2-week thrash, where I finish up the battery box as I started the last time, finish the high voltage wiring, but house projects get in the way, and there were some setbacks. So we'll just pick up where we left off. I've been spending some time collecting parts, moving them around, figuring out where I want things to go, and I've got the high voltage wiring done on one side of the front battery pack. This side's going to be about the same, so I figured rather than show you twice, I'll figure out what I'm doing before I show you what I'm doing. I got 2 of these service disconnects. It's a fuse and a safety disconnect. I had originally planned on putting one in the front and one in the back battery box, but there's not really room for it back here. I figure if I put it here, then I'll have a fuse on either side of the battery pack. The disconnect on that side will serve to split the pack in half. This will just be another disconnect leading out to the inverter. There's sort of a lot going on here, so let's start one panel at a time. Somebody commented on the last video that I should have drawn all of this up in CAD before I started working on it, which is not wrong. Right now I need to figure out if I can fit an arm down in here to connect the battery cable. That's kind of hard to figure out in CAD, which is why a lot of times I'll just make something and see if it fits. Speaking of making sure it fits, I should probably throw a fender on here. That'll work there. I was thinking I might want to move it down. I can't really move it down. This is going to take some staring for a while. So the issue is I need to fit this contactor, the pre-charge contactor, and the pre-charge resistor in here. These I could put here. That's too tall to go there. If I put this on a little bracket here, I won't be able to reach down in there very well. Well, I can't say that's particularly convenient, but it seems like it'll work. It's teachable moment time. When I was turning that wrench, I was feeling a weird little twinge in my arm against the side of the case here. Kind of just felt like a burr on there. But, I've got an isolation problem, and of course it's that battery module at the bottom. For some reason, the negative side of it is not isolated from the case, so all of this has 30 volts potential to the positive terminal on there, which is a problem I need to resolve. At this point, I figured out everything I need to know with the battery box in the Jeep, so I can go ahead and disassemble it, take it out, finish up on the bench, and then start welding it. This is just a good reminder that you really can't double-check things too many times or take too many precautions, because you really don't want to feel the wrath of Zeus with this stuff. It's also a good reminder that just because you see me do something doesn't mean it's necessarily the right way to do it. I try to do my best, but it's hard to know how to do everything. And believe me, I've tried. Before I pull this apart, I want to see if any of the other modules have the same problem. And it turns out that it's a problem with all of them. Figuring this out took a lot of careful poking around with the multimeter. The strips that I put between the bus bars and the case, I made out of some leftover ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene left over from ski building. It should be a really good insulator, but it turns out it's actually mildly conductive. So, thinking there's probably some sort of carbon-based pigment in that. I never would have really imagined that the plastic I used for insulation would have been an issue. You might say I was mildly shocked. But I've still got the CNC files, so really it's just a mildly tedious task of pulling apart each module and swapping it out for some unpigmented nylon. Now that that's done, and while these are out, I wired up a BMS, just temporarily. It's kind of a rat's nest, but that lets me charge these. So when they go in the Jeep, I'll have some juice, and it'll be closer to a top balance. It's also letting me check and make sure all of the internal wiring is right, which is good because this one is not. If I check at this connector, I've got two adjacent cell groups that are reading at 0.2 volts lower than the rest of them. But if I check at the connector where it's coming out of the battery pack, everything is the same. So what that means is somewhere on this circuit board I've got more resistance than I should on, I think it's this circuit. So these fuses are showing just under an ohm, some of them half an ohm, except for this one. That one's almost a mega ohm. I think our problem's that fuse. Good news is, I've got a whole bunch of extras. It's almost like I knew. Alright, so now that charged up happily. I started welding up some of this, and it kind of vaguely looks like something that's done by someone who knows how to TIG weld. Mounted my fuse disconnect again, and my contactor. Made a little cable for those. I 3D printed a mount for the contactor, and also a little drill guide for it so you can drill the holes in the right place. So now what I know is this connector is going to go kind of right about this. I gotta show this one off because I'm proud of it. Not great at TIG welding, but figured I'd show you that because I think it looks pretty good. And a lot of this is rinse and repeat, figure out what a piece looks like, draw it up, cut it out, weld it on, then figure out what the next piece looks like. I'm at a point where I wanted to just go ahead and mock everything up, make sure it fits. I'm picking up on a couple issues, but overall I'm pretty happy with this. Keep going. I got a piece of tube to close up around the steering shaft. Of course, laying this out is tricky. Maybe if I'm lucky. The shaft is good, but I need a little more space around that U-joint. It's kind of binding up there. I started chopping out where I needed clearance with the grinder, and then realized I could just kind of smash it back a little bit. Now I've got the clearance. I'll swap to a shorter set screw, but that should be pretty good to go. Let's work on getting this inverter mounted. I'd originally welded nuts into the cross member for mounting the back of the battery box, but it occurred to me that I would have to take the entire battery box apart if I ever need to jack it up to get the motor out. So I'm welding nuts in from the inside and running the bolts in from below. These got welded from the outside and ground down on the inside for clearance. And now I think it's time to do a test fit and see what glaring errors I've overlooked. This thing always goes on perfectly, easily every time. I think I had it right the first time, but upside down. I think I found the unforeseen problems. These rods aren't threaded perfectly straight, and the bungs that are welded in probably also aren't perfectly straight, so I kind of need to tweak them around to get them to line up. It's not a problem on the front here, but there's no way to do it on the back. I think the first step is going to be to open up these holes a little bit. Now I can just punch a little hole in the end of these rods. So now I can just get in there with a little punch, pull them around. I got this all together and realized that this corner is sitting like half an inch higher than that corner. And what's going on is that bottom battery is not seated the whole way down on this end. I'm going to have to pull everything apart to fix that, but I can still go ahead and get stuff laid out here. So now I can drill and tap for everything that gets mounted on here. The battery management system has a heat sink on the top, and it needs airflow to stay cool, which is a problem if you're putting it inside a box. So I designed the top of this to be flush with the lid. So I just put some holes for the studs in the lid. Now I'll move the heatsink to the outside. I'll goop that up with some thermal paste and put some longer studs in it for final assembly. But I think that's either a really good idea or a really bad idea, and I'm going to find out which one. Still got a bunch more fabrication and welding and drilling and tapping to do on this, but I'm going to take a break from that and start doing some wiring, because I've got a lot of that to do too. The battery management system monitors the voltage on each group of parallel cells. I've got 100 cell groups, and each one needs its own cell tap. That is 10. Which means the cell taps are wired for this one. The tricky thing here is the BMS works in cell groups of 12. Each color of wires is 12, but these are only 10. So I need to remember to skip the first pin on this one since it's the same as the last pin on this one. And then to make it even more confusing, pins 12 and 13 minus need to get wired together. This is definitely one of those sort of tedious tasks that I like to work on kind of a little bit at a time. Do one or two connectors, then go do something else for a while. If you keep doing that, eventually you get it done. I've got all the cell taps on this front box in place, and now I'm just finishing up the last of the thermistor connections. That doesn't go there. That one goes over here. I got this thing roughly taped up with some Tessa tape. Once I validate everything and make sure all the wiring is right, I can just go back and wrap it better. Kind of like that better than zip ties because I don't have to cut it off later. I do need to pin out this connector a little bit more, but this should do it for the rear. I made a dumb mistake. I was working through validating all of my BMS wiring, which in and of itself is not dumb. It's something you need to do because with this many wires, it's kind of inevitable you're going to make a mistake. And I found two wires that were swapped, so I went to depin them and swap them, but the depinning tool that I bought had broken. So I tried 3D printing several of them, which also is not a dumb thing to do. It's worth a shot. None of them worked, but in the process of trying to use them, I bent over one of the pins. So I reached in with a pair of needle nose pliers to straighten it out. Also not a dumb thing to do, because it needs to be straight. And I did get it out and got the wires swapped, but in the process of straightening it out, I must have shorted across a couple of the pins, because the dumb thing I did was not disconnect the battery from the wiring, and I blew a bunch of the fuses on the circuit board I made, so now I get to practice desoldering. There's not a whole lot of room to work around the back battery boxes, so it's going to be a lot easier to take them out and work on them on the bench. For running the high voltage wiring into this box, I just put a cable gland in here. Of course, with 1/0 cable, I can't get this to bend down there, and if I'd set it in line with that, it would have been too far over, and not really any way to get it on, so time for another little bus bar. Except I didn't like the way it was sitting with that plastic nut on there, so I turned up a threaded bung and welded it in. It might look about the same from where you are, but I'm a lot happier with that. Trying to figure out how to fit the batteries and a fuse and a contactor and all the connectors in here feels an awful lot like trying to put 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound box, but I think with some creativity I'll figure it out. Obviously these components can't live on the outside, but it makes it a lot easier to drill and tap to do it from the outside. Also lets me show you how I'm putting this together. 3D printed a little spacer under the contactor, brings it up to the same height as the post for the fuse. Just kind of simplifies the mounting, saves a little bit of space. Then all that gets dropped in with some custom bus bars and a custom cap that took like 6 iterations to get printed properly. I can use one of these Tesla bus bars to make the series connection on this side, but going from this terminal down to the fuse, that's going to take a little bit. The deeper part of this, what's going to be the top, got tapped for M8 because I've been using metric hardware for all my high voltage connections. But the stud on the fuse holder is 3/8, and it just makes me feel dirty to mix measurement systems like this. Pretty good. That's about what that'll look like all stacked up, but Once I drop it down in there, you're not going to be able to see it. I also made a little spacer for this terminal, just to clear around this bolt. All of this is going to have to get broken down to paint the box anyway. So let's jump back up to the front. And take a look at what I've been doing with the inverter. I've got my negative terminal coming up from the back. That's hooked up to the negative. I'm using 1/0 wire on all of my high voltage connections. It might be a little bit overkill, but it's not really something you want to skimp on. And where I've got space, I'm using these Amphenol quick disconnects. They're a little clumsy to assemble, but they sure do give a satisfying click in. I 3D printed a little adapter to mount them on the inverter and melted in some threaded inserts. The positive one comes out of this side of the battery box. With assembling these connectors, I couldn't really make this cable any shorter. And given the lack of flex in these things, it's kind of hard to get it lined up where I need to. So, after about 6 different iterations of 3D printed spacers, I think I've got something that'll work there. Of course, I need to break all of this down to be able to make that connection, and also make the other connection I need inside the inverter. So on a stock Prius, the battery voltage is 200-ish volts. Comes in here and goes to these two terminals. The positive runs through the buck boost converter, boosts up to 400 or 500 volts before it goes into the power stage. Since I'm running a 400-ish volt battery, we're going to bypass the buck boost on the positive. The negative still runs on the same bus, so I'm just going to tap in where the stock position is there. And we can throw this cover back on for now. And move back over to figuring out the battery box. I've got to cut this out a little bit, drill some more holes. It's all going to be a lot easier to do if this thing's out of the Jeep and has all the batteries out of it. Now I can make sure this fits. Which it does. Now I can take it all back apart again. And 3D print a bunch more iterations because while that got the connector in the right place, there was no way to actually connect the cable to the connector. Turns out that moving the heatsink from the top of the BMS was harder than I anticipated because the studs were pressed in from the back side. 5 out of the 6 broke as I was taking them off, so I had to drill them out. I went up a size on these from a number 6 screw to a number 8 screw, just because, well, partly because I didn't get the holes drilled properly. But hard-fought victory, I think that's pretty good to go now. While everything was broken down for paint, I also decided to spray the underside of the hood, and also rehab an old rusted-out compost bin that I've been meaning to get around to fixing for a few years. I realized that because of this Jeep project, I've now got the tools to pretty easily make the replacement panels it needed. So we can cross that one off the project list. If you ever find that your collection of projects feeds off itself, maybe consider supporting the channel by purchasing my Professional Project Collector Association t-shirt, available at jeremymakesthings.net. I should do sweatshirts. 3D printed some new bushings for all of these. Used a little bit softer TPU and made them solid so they're a little stronger. And for the spacers under the battery box, I put little ears on them so it'll locate them front and back so they won't slide around when I'm trying to get things lined up. I used some two-part automotive seam sealer to join the two halves of the battery box together. I was a little worried about getting it assembled and getting all the screws in before the seam sealer kicked, but I worked quickly and it seemed to go pretty well. And just to be sure, I globbed up everything on the inside too. This is a pressure relief valve. Basically has a little membrane in there that will let air in and out to account for pressure changes. It can also blow out in the unlikely event that things go really wrong and a lot of pressure builds up inside the box. That way it's only an incendiary device and not an explosive. With as many times as I put this thing together and taken it apart, it feels good to finally put it together for what might be the last time, but probably isn't. And since I'm tired of taking it apart and putting it back together, you're probably tired of watching me put it back together. And of course, that wasn't the last time I put it together, because I got it all together, checked my BMS leads again, and had one that was dead. So I had to take it apart one more time. But now it's all together. I haven't sealed a lot of it up yet, because I know that at least the lids are going to have to come off again. One of the only things that I did different this time was to add some thermal strips between the BMS and the lid, and also use some thermal glue on the heatsink for the BMS to glue it to the lid. I've checked these BMS leads about 8 times with the multimeter to make sure everything's in the right order, so it's finally time to plug them in. So now I'm just working on doing a very basic and conservative configuration on the battery management system, and it's telling me I'm having an issue with cell 65, which is going to be somewhere down here. Quick check on the voltage, and it seems like the voltage coming out of here is good. Which is good because it means I have a wiring problem with this. It means I don't have to take the entire thing apart. Actually, I'm wrong. It's this module. It's still on the bottom, so it's still going to be a pain if this is the problem. Well, I couldn't find a problem there either, and it turns out I'm misinterpreting this because this is my cell 65, but it's counting the ones that are not populated as well. So the orange ones would be up to 48, the red ones would be up to 60, so I'm looking for the fifth yellow one. Okay, I see no problem there. Well, I went through the wiring again and could not find any problems with it. So I looked up the troubleshooting procedure for that code for the Orion BMS, and it said to swap 2 connectors and see if the problem stays in the same place. Even with one of the other connectors in there, it was still on cell 65, which means it's an internal issue with the BMS, which means this gets to take a trip back to the factory in Illinois. This project has felt like it's been 2 weeks away from driving for months now. And I was finally down to a week, and then a few days, and then a few hours from actually getting to drive this. Now I'm back to 2 weeks. So this has been the most frustrating day of this project so far. But I can either mope around and feel sorry for myself, which I did some of, or I can keep chipping away at all of the rest of the things I have to do on this. And I've got everything hooked up in the back boxes too. I do know that the contactors back here are closing and all of the wiring's good, so might as well get this closed up. The Orion BMS has internal fuses in it that blow if the cell taps are connected in the wrong order. Since I checked my wiring multiple times, both before and after I had problems, and couldn't find anything wrong with my wiring, and I got this thing used for a good price, I'm guessing it came to me damaged. The only real disappointment here is how long it took me to return it, get it repaired, and get sent back. If I had to do it over again, I'd probably do what I usually do, which is learn a new skill and fix it myself. It took about 5 weeks. I've been doing some other work in the meantime. Some of it you've seen. Some of it you'll see in future videos. But now we've got a key on the dashboard, and when you turn that, pack contactors click. And we've got the original foot start back in, and when you push that, the main contactors click and the inverter turns on. I've just got a real basic configuration with a 30 amp limit on it for now, just for test purposes. But when you push the accelerator, well, we didn't make it very far before I realized I had a little bit more configuring and tuning to do. But I'm very quickly learning and getting this thing sorted out. If you can't find them, grind them. Probably gonna have to brake going down this hill. I probably could have split this up into half a dozen different videos along the way. And in terms of playing the YouTube game, I probably should have done that. But at some point I told myself that I wasn't going to put this video out until I could park my Jeep on my big rock. I feel like that was the payoff of this whole process, and I think it was worth the wait. I thought that this thing was going to be a lot of fun, but getting to fool around with it in the woods a little bit made me realize just how much I underestimated how much fun this thing's going to be. There's still a ton more that I need to do, and I've already realized I've made some mistakes along the way that'll need to get fixed. But as motivated as I was before, I'm even more motivated now. And I'm also more confident that with some patience and persistence that we'll get this thing done. And I say we because I really couldn't do this without the people that help support this project, either through Patreon and YouTube memberships, buying the shirts, the sponsors like Lube, and just everybody that's been following along and watching these videos. So thanks for watching. I guess that's the next thing I need to do.